Thank you. Yeah, so I told my colleagues that I'll be speaking at DevFest, and I got a lot of advice on how to deal with stage fright. So one piece of advice was to actually just imagine everyone is naked. Yeah, I thought long and hard about that, but I'm not going to do it. But if I do pause for a little bit too long, I'm probably considering taking the advice. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so the title of my presentation today is Firebase Remote Config in Practice. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Ishmael. I'm an Android engineer. I'm from Joburg. I've been building Android apps for about 7 years. And my passion for Android stems from the fact that I think in this platform there's an opportunity to build apps that can change billions of lives in a very meaningful way. And what we want to do at Luno is put the power of crypto in everyone's hands. In case you're wondering if this talk will be useful to you, I'd say this talk is useful to anyone who's curious about Firebase Remote Config, anyone who's considering using Firebase Remote Config as a tool to manage feature releases, and anyone who's considering running experiments on Firebase AB Testing with Firebase Remote Config. I think most of us know what Firebase is, but for those of you in the audience who do not know what Firebase is, I'd say Firebase is a backend service that's built on Google infrastructure, and there is a variety of tools, a lot of tools in that help developers build quality apps that help them grow their user base and even make a profit. The next natural question to ask is, what is remote config? Firebase Remote Config is a tool, one of the tools within Firebase that basically allows you to change the behavior and appearance of your app without requiring your customers or your users to download and update. So there's a number of things that you can use Firebase Remote Config for. I think a pretty common usage for this is as a tool to manage feature toggle. A feature toggle is basically a construct that allows you to enable and disable a feature in runtime. So the nice thing about using Firebase in this way is that it lets you do some interesting things like manage the degree of exposure to your customers. So if you've got a new feature that you've built and you're not sure about the quality of your feature, you can sort of roll it gradually to your customers until you're pretty certain that your feature is stable. You can also publish locale specific content. So yeah, if you have maybe messages, copy, text, or images that you want to have shown differently in different countries, you can sort of use Firebase to do this. You can also use JSON to basically just configure your UI or your logic. So I've taken this screenshot to just to give you an idea of how easy it is to create a parameter in Firebase Remote Config. So you basically navigate to the console. Once you're on the console, you find that under the tab that says parameters, you find a button that says add a parameter. You'll then see the screen. The first thing you'd need to do is give a name for your parameter. I give a name that example feature for DevFest. And you'll basically use that to index into your remote config map. You then obviously have to select your data type. It could be a string, a number, a Boolean, or a JSON. You have an option to add a default value. And you also have the option to use an in-app default. This is basically useful in the event that the app isn't able to download the remote config values. So it will just default to the in-app defaults. Yeah, once you've done that, you can just review your changes and then publish. So yeah, this is basically you reviewing your changes. Yeah, once you've done that, you now need to go into your conditions tab to create a new condition. And basically, this is what allows you to be specific about the portion of your customer base that you want to target. So in this case, I wanted to target customers in South Africa. So you basically just select your region and then define your country. If you want to do gradual rollouts, you select the option to select a percentile, and then you define what percentage of your customers you want to target. You can then create the conditions. You have the options to review it again. Once you're happy with it, you can publish it. Then the next step would be to link that to the parameter that you've just created. Yeah, and that's how easy it is to create a remote config parameter. So what are the other use cases? Other use cases include running tests. So if you want to run tests with Firebase AB Testing, you have the option to run it with remote config. And this is basically pretty cool because it allows you to test if you have different variants that you want to play with. It allows you to test which variant will get a favorable response from your customers. There's also this shiny new feature called remote config personalization, and it basically allows you to improve engagement for your app or your feature. And how it works is that it uses machine learning to actually assign a variant to whatever customer is using your app. So this is I think a pretty cool feature, and something that everybody should experiment with. So I've talked about how to actually create parameters on the Firebase console. Then yeah, obviously we need to discuss what you need to do on your apps. So specifically for Android, you'll need to add your dependencies, and I'm not going to talk about this much because there's good documentation, and I have included references at the end of the slides. There's good documentations on how to do this. You'd also have to put your parameter key somewhere in the code base. In this case, I've created an object called remote config, and I have my parameter key or parameter name there, which is what I'm going to use to index to get my values. Then very important, you need to define your in-app defaults. So this is useful if your app fails to download the remote config parameters for any reasons. It could be like a network call that failed or whatever. You'll then default to these values. Then the next step would be to fetch and activate your remote config. This is not the actual code, but this is the code that is in the samples. But the idea here is to show you that you need to fetch and activate your remote config parameters. And it's advised that you do this at startup. This way you don't interfere with the customer's user experience or user's journey. So if you have to do it somewhere else, you need to be careful because you might need to show loading speediness, which could create a confusing experience for your customers. So yeah, let me talk about how we use remote config at Luno. So yeah, basically my team used this to run experiments on Firebase AB testing with Firebase remote config. And we actually already had good infrastructure in place to run experiments, but we found that there were edge cases that it just didn't cater for. We called it Luno Labs, and the trick with it was that you had to actually be a signed-in user to use that infrastructure. So if you're not a signed-in user, we do offer like a pre-sign-up experience to customers who just want to explore the app. So if you're not a signed-up user, we basically can't do any sort of experiments around those those screens and those flows. So we turned to Firebase as a solution, and some of the experiments we did included copy experiments. So this was pretty cool to see that just using different tone of voices and different copies on certain screens can actually improve your metrics by up to 25%, which was the case as well for us. We also experimented with different screen layouts. So basically just rearranging buttons in a screen and changing the order of things. And it also had very surprising results as well. We also use it for releasing as a feature management tool for releasing features, particularly into the staging environment for testing. And then, obviously, once your feature is ready for prod, we would use that to release the feature into prod. Yeah, so let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Excuse my very old references. So the not so good. It's actually possible to leak features, and I found out. Maybe not the hard way, but I actually found out that you can leak features. The first time I leaked features, I was basically trying to test, and what I did was I went for Boolean values, basically just changed it from false to true to enable a feature. That was a horrible idea because obviously it's enabling the feature for all your builds, including builds in production. So in that way, you're actually leaking a feature. So hopefully, nobody actually was downloading any of the parameters at that point in time. But you can actually leak features, and there is ways around it. The way around it is to use conditions. So conditions allow you to be specific about what you want to target. So if you have different variants or build variants for your app, you can actually decide what variant of the app you want to target. So in my case, I wanted to target the debug build, which works with the staging environment, basically. But if you don't have variants of the app, then you may have a bit of a problem there. What you could do on Android is target a specific version code. So every build that you push up to the Play Store, if you have an alpha build, a beta build, has a unique version code that's associated with that build, so you could target it in that way. There's also the option to actually target a specific device, and what you'd need is the unique the Firebase instance ID, which is unique to the app. It does change if you uninstall the app and install it again, or if you clear your app cache or your app data. So that's one way to do it. The tricky bit is that you need to get the version code, and usually people print it out on the logcat or the console. But what I've been trying to do is actually build a screen that creates sort of a user-friendly way for people to get the Firebase instance ID. And this will be helpful for the non-technical members of your team who want to do testing. Yeah, the other challenge I faced was that there isn't actually an obvious system for reviewing changes. So if you go and, I did show you an example, if you go and create a parameter and then you're happy with it, you'll see a screen that allows you to review the change you just made. But the challenge with that is you're reviewing your own changes, right? Which is usually a bad idea because you're blind to your mistakes. So this is tricky, and basically you can make silent changes on there as well because there isn't a notification system that tells everybody that you're about to deploy a change or to deploy something or make an important change. Because we're using this as as feature flags basically. You're basically doing a deployment in many instances when you make a change. So you might want other, you want you might want to make everyone aware that you're actually making a change, your other team members, that is. So how we got around this? Yeah, we actually didn't have a solution for this. So our system of review is that the design associates basically writes up a design doc, a data design doc. We all review that, and if we're happy with what they've done, then they can go and put the changes. But there's room within that space to actually do something erroneously. So what I've been experimenting with is you can use another feature in Firebase called Cloud Functions to basically listen for changes on your remote config console. So yeah, what you basically have to do is create a Slack bot and basically your remote config function will listen for changes and then send a message to your Slack bot, which then sends a message to whatever channel. The data you send there is up to you. You can actually just send a JSON that tells you there's been a change. It tells you who did the change, but it doesn't actually tell you the change. A better way to do it, I guess, would be to send the whole template, remote config template. To send the whole remote config template. But then if you've got many teams working on that and then your file grows and it becomes too large, nobody will review it or look at those changes. An even better way to do it would be to actually get the exact change and get a diff that you post to a Slack channel. And obviously, the reviewing you'd be doing would be like retrospectively, so the change has already happened. But there is a nice rollback feature on the console that you can go use if you do spot that something has gone wrong. So another solution a colleague of mine suggested, he's actually done this before in his previous job, is to download the template, the actual Firebase remote config template, put it in a repo, and actually have a pipeline that pushes that. So the nice thing about this is that it's actually more secure. It's a lot more secure because with the other systems, anybody can just go onto Facebook and anybody can just go onto Firebase console and then make the change. And obviously that could be a breaking change. So the limitations are with the solution where you put the template in a repo is that you'd basically have to just catching my breath. Yeah, you'd basically have to limit the access to making changes to just the engineers who will know how to work with the repo. Last one is you're limited in terms of the insights you can get, particularly if you're using this to run experiments. So Firebase AB testing is basically just a black box, and you are limited to use what is made available to you. We had to find solutions around this as well. And our solution was try to mimic the same systems we had in our own experimentation infrastructure on Firebase. And we basically just defined conversion events so that we could then construct a funnel on the Firebase console, or rather on Google Analytics. Okay, so there is good news, and I've talked about all the bad, but there's actually a lot of good, and I don't think this slide I've created here actually does justice in terms of explaining what good there is in using this tool. For one, it's very easy to implement. Everyone can actually create a remote config parameter. So you save time and reduce a lot of complexity. It's also great if you don't have a backend. If you don't have a backend team and you want to be able to dynamically switch on and off features, this would be the tool for you to use. I think there's some new additions as well that are pretty helpful, like personalization, that uses the machine learning to then determine which of your customers are going to like which variant. So those are all pretty great things. I think this is a great tool to use. And part of why I wanted to do this talk was to get conversations going about how we can use these tools better. I think apart from like the issues I have around reviews, most of the things are manageable with tools such as things such as conditions, and other things that you can do. So I did actually, while experimenting with this, create a GitHub repo. There's a link to it, or you could use the QR code if you want. I have not included any of my social media here. I wasn't sure whether Twitter was still a thing. Yeah, thank you. That's it for me.